On July 19, 1975, a sad chapter was written in the political history of Sierra Leone when 8 of 15 men who were tried and convicted for an alleged coup attempt of July 1974 were executed at the Pademba Road prison in Freetown, Sierra Leone. On the morning of the executions, the bodies of the men who had been killed by hanging were displayed for about an hour before the crowd outside the Pademba Road prison in Freetown, in order to send a strong message to all those who might want to attempt to overthrow the government. The sad display of the bodies of the men who had been killed by hanging sent shockwaves throughout Sierra Leone and even beyond. The marathon trial and eventual executions of these men was not only a burden of grief to family and loved ones, but a terrible loss to the entire nation. In this episode, we cover one of the darkest moments in Sierra Leone's history. However, to fully understand the root cause of this alleged coup attempt, now believed to have been stage-managed, we need to go all the way back to the very beginning. Sierra Leone was under British occupation for approximately 153 years, from 1808 to 1961. The Crown Colony, which included Freetown and its surrounding areas, was established in 1808, and in 1896 the hinterland of Sierra Leone became a British protectorate, thus creating Sierra Leone Protectorate, now known as the provinces. Altogether, the country gained its independence from Britain and became a member of the Commonwealth of Nations on April 27, 1961, with Sir Milton Margai of the Sierra Leone People's Party, the SLPP, as its first Prime Minister, and upon his death in 1964, he was succeeded as Prime Minister and head of the governing SLPP by his younger brother, Sir Albert Margai, as the country's second Prime Minister. Sierra Leone held its second general elections as an independent nation in March 1967, with the first being held in 1962. The 1967 Sierra Leonean general election was the first successful democratic election held in post-colonial Africa. Opposition leader Siaka Stevens of the All People's Congress Party, the APC, which was founded in 1960 as a breakaway from the SLPP party, won the election, marking the first time that a ruling party had lost an election in sub-Saharan Africa, excluding white-ruled South Africa and southern Rhodesia. However, within hours of taking office, Siaka Stevens was ousted in a military coup led by the army commander, Brigadier General David Lansana, a close ally of Sir Albert Margai, who had appointed him to the position in 1964. Siaka Stevens and the Governor-General were placed under arrest by the then ADC to the Governor-General, Lieutenant Samuel Hinga Norman, who was acting on the orders of the force commander on what Siaka Stevens claimed were the orders of Sir Albert Margai. Brigadier General David Lansana took power and declared martial law. 2 days later, on March 23, 1967, Brigadier General David Lansana was himself overthrown in a counter-military coup by a group of majors, namely Major Augustine Charles Blake, Major Sandy Bokari Jumu, and Major Bokari Idrissa Kai Samba. Sir Albert Margai and Brigadier General David Lansana were both arrested and detained. The political loyalties of all three officers lay with the SLPP camp, but not with Sir Albert Margai. Major Kai Samba's brother, Kutubu Kai Samba, was not only a thorn in Albert Margai's political flesh. His defection from the SLPP actually cost Albert Margai the 1967 elections. The two coups of 1967 were nonetheless similar in that they represented the continuation of civilian party politics by other means. The trio who removed Brigadier General David Lansana from office were certainly not Albert Margai loyalists, but they were even less sympathetic to the prospect of an All People's Congress APC government, the party that won the 1967 elections. Thus, rather than return the country to constitutional rule, the trio of coup leaders decided to form a junta, the National Reformation Council, NRC, which ruled the country for a year. Initially, the NRC announced that its leader would be Lieutenant Colonel Ambrose Patrick Genda, who at the time was the country's second secretary at the United Nations in New York. Lieutenant Colonel Ambrose Patrick Genda was posted abroad in 1966 after the force commander, Brigadier General David Lansana, accused him of acts of insubordination. He was cashiered from the army and given an administrative post in the Ministry of External Affairs and later sent on a diplomatic assignment in the Sierra Leone mission to the United Nations. 4 days after the announcement, there was a sudden change in leadership. Lieutenant Colonel Ambrose Patrick Gender was replaced as leader of the NRC by Lieutenant Colonel Andrew Jackson Smith, who, at the time of his appointment, was on an officer's course in Britain. Lieutenant Colonel Andrew Jackson Smith thus returned home and took over the leadership of the NRC. The NRC dissolved political parties and suspended the constitution. After 13 months of military rule, the APC was restored to power following a counter-military coup, with its leader Siaka Stevens as Prime Minister in April 1968. At the same time, the Constitution of Sierra Leone was restored, with Siaka Stevens being asked to form a national government by appointing both APC and SLPP members into the cabinet. As soon as Siaka Stevens assumed the premiership, he soon embarked on consolidating his rule. The national government that was formed, which was to incorporate members of the SLPP, favored the APC more than the formula that Siaka Stevens had agreed to with the new SLPP leader, Saliha Jusu Sheriff, whose party was given fewer ministries than it had anticipated. Soon, election petitions were taken out against successful SLPP candidates in the previous general election. Within a month of the establishment of the national government, 27 petitions had been filed by defeated APC candidates, including 2 against former Prime Minister Albert Margai, who had fled the country, and Saliha Jusu Sheriff, the SLPP parliamentary leader and Minister of Health in the national government. By the end of July 1968, 20 SLPP seats were declared vacant by the courts, and a very violent by-elections were conducted, which resulted in many casualties. As a result of the violence, some by-elections in the south and eastern parts of the country were postponed. Calm was not completely restored, and in November 1968, Siaka Stevens declared a state of emergency after disturbances in the provinces. Siaka Stevens pursued a vigorous policy of consolidating his political hold on the country. The national government, which was formed on return to civilian rule and included SLPP members, soon ran into problems. One APC backbencher, Ibrahim Bashtaki, a journalist who had contributed so much to Siaka Stevens' election victory, criticized the idea of a joint APC and SLPP government, pointing out that the APC had fought tyranny for 5 years and the people had given their verdict. He wanted to know why the defeated party should be admitted into the government. As a result, the national government was dissolved in 1969, and Ibrahim Bashtaki was appointed Minister of Information and Broadcasting in 1969. More pressing, however, was the need for Siaka Stevens to strengthening his ties with, and in fact his control of the military. Less than 2 months after his return, Siaka Stevens purged the army of several officers, all Mendi, who were subsequently arrested for allegedly intriguing with unnamed SLPP politicians. Lieutenant Colonel Ambrose Patrick Gender, a Mende who was then the second highest ranking officer, was forced to retire. The principal actors in the successive coups of 1967, Brigadier David Lansana, Major Charles Blake, Police Commissioner William Leake, Major Bokari Idrissa Kai Samba, Lieutenant Samuel Norman, and 5 civilian collaborators were tried for treason and sentenced to be hanged. The NRC chairman Andrew Jackson Smith was tried separately since he did not actually participate in either of the 2 coups, but was likewise sentenced to death. Although the Sierra Leone Court of Appeal eventually ruled that the charges had been improperly drawn up and declared the proceedings null, Siaka Stevens continued to detain David Lansana, Andrew Jackson Smith, and the others into the 1970s. Not content with purging senior-level threats, Siaka Stevens also borrowed a page from former Prime Minister Albert Margai's playbook for controlling the military by forming an officer corps loyal to his regime and prepared to defend it against internal opposition. Upon entering office, Siaka Stevens immediately implemented a 15% increase in the pay for all warrant officers, NCOs, and privates, whose ranks constituted the backbone of the mutiny that paved the way for his return to power, and promised increased military expenditures for new weapons as well as improved living conditions. In June 1969, Siaka Stevens set up a 28-member committee representing various areas and groups in the country except the SLPP and the Chamber of Commerce, to advise on the sort of Republican constitution to be adopted. In addressing this committee, Siaka Stevens pointed out that the monarchical constitution, which Sierra Leone adopted from independence, had outlived its usefulness. And that, besides, that constitution tended to foster political links with the old colonial power and thus prevented Sierra Leone assuming a role as a fully independent sovereign state. Opposition groups were concerned that Siaka Stevens was aiming for an executive type of presidency, which would make him unaccountable to the cabinet. The Minister of Information and Broadcasting